Hi, this is my presentation on Madagascar. So, starting off with the demographics real quick, it's got a population of about 32 million. The inhabitants are the Malagasy people. Their capital is Antananarivo. And they have something that they really have here is a blend of all of these different cultures and people. They speak Malagasy and French because of French colonization. They have a ton of African, Asian, and Polynesian history and culture, kind of all blended into everything because of their location as well. And their religion, primarily Christian, but people traditionally believe in the Zanahari or creative God, but because of colonization, a lot of people believe in Christianity. Quick history. So, from basically 350 AD to the 11th century, people are just kind of going in and out of Madagascar, establishing ports, trade, all of that stuff. There's just a lot of people that are coming and going from Madagascar, and so there's a lot of blending going on. And then in 1818, well, I guess in 1540, they have a Marina kingdom, which is the first kingdom of Madagascar and dominates the island. Then 1818 comes along and London sends missionaries. And that's kind of when the colonization period begins. And all of the colonization and the religion and all that stuff kind of comes in after this point. In 1883, France invades and the Franco-Hava War begins. And then in 1895, Queen Ranavalona III surrenders to France. And then for the next 15 years, a pacification period begins in Madagascar, which heavy on this part of pacification because it was a time of just colonization and just kind of oppressing the native people of Madagascar. And then in 1947 and 1949, they had a Malagasy uprising in which thousands of people died. It was between the French army and Malagasy nationalists. Tons of deaths, very violent, and it really didn't end up going anywhere for a long time. French just kind of regained control and suppressed the movement. But then about 10 years later, Madagascar finally wins independence and they elect their new president. Then 15 years later, they elect a new head of state and president of the Supreme Revolutionary Council, and he proceeds to rule for the next 26 years. Sometimes controversially, sometimes not, but he was their leader for 26 years. Then in 1992, after new democratic reforms kind of come in, a new constitution is created. So their president is currently serving his third term. Government-wise, they have a semi-presidential democratic republic with a multi-party pluralist system. A lot of words, but basically they have a president, a prime minister, a cabinet, and they also have representatives elected by the public. And in order to avoid one person having control over the island like they did for so many years, now they have a bunch of different parties to kind of keep each other in check. However, it has caused a lot of instability because a lot of people can't agree on what they want. And the government has a tough time with insurrections and coups and disputed elections and corruption and all that good stuff. So the country itself has struggled with stability pretty much since its inception. Um, so they have a lot of cyclones, which are natural disasters that kind of take away a lot of the crops that they're able to do. Tourism, it doesn't have a huge impact on it, but it probably will in the future. And so there's just a lot of instability in Madagascar because of all the politics and that sort of thing. The cuisine here, rice is everything here. It is huge in Madagascar. It is the pillar of food. No meal is complete without it. If you invite people over to your house to eat, they always eat rice. It's even featured on one of their bills of money that they have. And then even Renavola, which translates to valuable water, it's rice water. And they have a lot of influence from Arab culture, like the spices. They also eat a lot of fish because they're an island, a lot of meat, a lot of veggies. Drink wise, Three Horses beer is definitely the most popular and it's kind of emblematic of Madagascar, but they also drink herbal teas, regular teas, rum, fruit juice, wine, coffee, all that. Madagascar has a ton of really cool traditions, so it's really tough for me to pick these ones. But these are the ones that I thought were really valuable. So the first one is inseparable family. Basically, just a focus on keeping the family intact, keeping the family close together, and really valuing that. And their family unit includes, it's not just mom, dad, and kids. It's aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, siblings, grandparents, cousins. It's everybody. So it's really cool that they have just like this massive family unit that they really focus on keeping together. They also have a really cool tradition where every 3, 5, or 7 years, it depends on what the astrologer says for the family, but they exhume and rewrap their ancestors' remains in silk. So in Madagascar, they have a heavy emphasis on the past and honoring people in the past, um, and so this is part of that. They have a big feast. They have traditional instruments and music, and they honor their ancestors by respecting their bodies and rewrapping it in silk. Some other traditions are Madagascar and kickboxing, which is pretty cool. It's a weaponless martial art, and the winners are very widely respected. It was only open to men for a very long time, but a lot of women are getting into it now as well. They play traditional music during the fight to give it more significance. The skills are passed down generationally, which is really cool. And it's mostly practiced in coastal areas and has even spread to neighboring islands. The people here tend to be very friendly, very hospitable. They have a heavy emphasis on good manners. They're very polite, and they share everything. They're very community oriented. If you can't pay for something, it doesn't matter. You won't go empty. You won't go home empty handed. That's just how it always is. They're also very sensitive, and they obviously respect their elders a lot, as you saw with the ancestor exhumation. Popular culture, they have a pretty low literacy rate here, and the media can be pretty heavily impacted by politics. So a lot of people rely on the radio and oral history to kind of get a sense of culture and popular culture and what's going on in the world. Um, and then in popular culture, as you've probably seen, Madagascar, the movie franchise, not the most accurate, but there's also several other movies and some pretty cool stories about Madagascar that are told in movie form. So physical communication, pointing is like this is considered rude, but if you bend your finger and point like that, it's fine. And so people tend to point a lot, but they don't go like that. And then eye contact is fine, but keep it limited. Otherwise, it's kind of seen as disrespectful if you look at someone for too long. When you meet somebody, shake their hand. Right hand shakes and the left hand grabs their elbow like this, and that's kind of the same matter. Men and women and women, doesn't really matter. And then if you're talking to somebody, there tends to be a lot of physical contact, not as much between genders, but definitely between men and men and women. They touch each other a lot when they're talking, and that kind of goes along with the proxemics personal space. There's very limited personal space. Even if you're meeting someone for the first time or in a professional setting, chances are you will have much less than an arm's length away of personal space in between the two of you. Paralinguistics, people are very upfront here. For example, if someone is flirting with you and you're not interested, it's better to just save your time and energy and just straight up say I'm not interested. Otherwise, you're kind of playing hard to get. And I watched a couple videos of the languages, and what the cool thing is, there's a lot of you can definitely hear the influence that all the French and the Arabs and the Polynesian languages have all had on this. But it has a pretty sharp, clear pronunciation of each word, and it's a pretty cool language. And then chronemics, in the capital, a lot of people wear watches because it's more urban and it's more industrialized. A lot of people wear watches, and a lot of people tend to be very punctual. But once you step outside of the capital, you're on Malagasy time, which is where people go by the sun. They're pretty much never on time. They'll be an hour, 2 hours late to pretty much everything. And they have a very high awareness and pride in this Malagasy time. And if you ask anybody outside the city what time it is, they can look at the sun and tell you unless it's cloudy, which is pretty cool. Their engagement, they have an engagement conflict style. And I couldn't really find anything online about this, but I just kind of had to infer. They're very direct, but they're also very expressive. But they do tell a lot of stories. So it could also kind of go into dynamic as well. But they have direct communication, a lot of respect for elders. So, they're probably not going to be super, super direct with elders and might be seen as disrespectful. Um, and then family units, a lot of emphasis on keeping the family together. So that might change the way someone approaches a conflict as well. And with a lot of violent political conflict, that could also have an impact on the conflict resolution styles. But I think I found that engagement was probably the most accurate. When it comes to the Hofstede cultural dimensions, it's not a big enough country to be on really any of the websites that we use. So I did Indonesia because I looked it up and said it was the closest culturally to Madagascar. Um, So they have a pretty high power distance. They accept hierarchy pretty well, and as well as like they very much respect their elders. They're a pretty collectivist society, and loyalty pretty much overrides a lot of other things. Very high, excuse me, very low focus on achievement, and it's more on status and who you are as a person and quality of life. They have a low preference. They tend low preference for uncertainty avoidance. They tend to keep the peace regardless of emotions. They'll kind of keep their emotions um, in a little bit to keep the peace and keep things certain. And then long term orientation, they're very short term. They accept things as they are and they prefer tradition as opposed to being in control of the surrounding circumstances. And indulgence, they're pretty restrained. For Hall's cultural mentions, they have a polychronic culture. Time is seen as cyclical. So I thought this was really cool. They see the future as something that it comes behind their head. And then they see it like the future becomes the past, and then they can see the past in front of them. And then they can learn from it, understand, and know, which is pretty cool. They have a high context culture. Even though there's a blend of cultures, there's a lot going on. It all kind of melds into one culture that everyone's pretty much familiar with. And they have a lot of emphasis on tradition and modernity being together. And as we talked about earlier, very limited space. Um, they believe that relationships override rules, especially when it comes to family. They're very collectivist, loyal, and family is highly prioritized. They have a much higher personal involvement in business, and they conceal over expressing emotions. They emphasize more who you are over what you've done. Significance of the past is more than the future because they kind of see the past here and the future hasn't happened yet. And they have a strong emphasis on multitasking as well, and it's controlled by more external factors as opposed to being in control of the situation. But that's my presentation. Thank you.